A silver Buick came to a quiet stop at the curb. The door opened, and a black woman stepped out. Her posture was upright, deliberate, square shoulders beneath a dark navy blazer. In her left hand, she carried a polished, deep mahogany leather briefcase. Her petite heels tapped rhythmically on the stone floor, steady, not rushed, not hesitant. Her name was Celeste Monroe. But in that moment, not a single person at the security gate knew or cared what that name meant. None of them realized that the woman they were about to disrespect was a federal judge, a woman who had presided over major federal cases from the Deep South to the Midwest. To them, she was just another black woman walking into a place they didn't think she belonged, with silver curls tucked neatly into place, with calm eyes, and a stride that carried no fear. It was almost predictable, because she wasn't wearing her judge's robe. Celeste never wore it outside the courtroom. She believed that if justice was truly blind, then everyone walking through those courthouse doors should first be seen as a citizen. Not a title, not a position, not a privilege wrapped in fabric, but that very belief, that quiet dignity, that refusal to dress herself in visible power, also made her an easy target. As soon as she approached the security checkpoint, the air shifted. Something cold and rough slid into the space between breaths. Deputy Hank Riker, towering, broad-shouldered, with a rough voice and eyes that couldn't hide the disgust, stepped into her path.
"Stop right there. I need you to step out of line."
Celeste paused. Just for a beat?
Is there a problem, officer?
Riker didn't answer immediately. He looked at her like she was something out of place, scanning from her shoes, her tailored blazer, to her neatly combed silver hair. There was a flicker in his eyes, suspicion tinged with anger.
"Who do you think you are? Walking up in here like you belong, no name badge, dressed like that. Just waltzing into a federal courthouse."
Celeste calmly reached into her jacket and pulled out her federal badge, holding it up. Under the light, the gold shimmered, an unmistakable sign of authority. But Riker didn't even glance at it. He took it, reluctantly, and slipped it straight into his own pocket, like it was nothing more than a crumpled receipt.
I want my badge back.
Riker leaned in close, inches now. His voice dropped, laced with venom.
"Where are you rushing off to, sweetheart?"
That word, sweetheart, cut through the air like a slap, not because it was tender, because it was toxic. A word meant to diminish, to strip a grown, accomplished black woman of her dignity and turn her into something small. A young female officer nearby flinched. She felt the wrongness in the moment, but she said nothing, just lowered her gaze.
I need to get to the courtroom.
"Not so fast. We've got random checks today."
Riker smirked. He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed her wrist, tight, and pulled her toward a side hallway. People walked by. They saw, but no one said a word. Everyone just looked away, like avoiding an inconvenient truth. The side room was cold, dark. No windows, just a lone steel chair, a scanning cart, and a set of electric clippers already plugged in. Celeste took a slow breath.
I do not consent. I have done nothing suspicious. You have no legal right to detain me. This is unlawful.
Riker chuckled dryly.
"You're acting suspicious now.
He pointed to the chair.
Sit."
Celeste didn't move.
"You think that badge means something to me?"
He sneered, spitting every word like venom.
"To me. You're just another black woman trying to act important. I decide who's who around here."
Then 2 more men entered, one bald, nervous. The other one held down the chair. They grabbed Celeste by both arms.
This is illegal. I demand your names.
No one answered. Then came the sound. Bzz, bzz. The clippers came alive like an angry swarm. The first lock of silver hair fell to the floor, then another and another. No one spoke. No one stopped. They just giggled. "What's she holding onto that hair for?" someone mumbled.
She looks neater now.
Riker said, brushing her hair off his sleeve. Celeste didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She just clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white and let the strands fall, like mourning her dignity in silence. When they finished, she remained seated, but her eyes were fire, quiet, controlled, but burning. Riker opened the door, waving her off like shooing a stray dog.
You're done. Courtroom's down the hall. Better hurry, don't want to be late.
Celeste stood slowly. She walked to the desk, picked up her badge without a word, her back straight, chin raised. Though her head had been shaved in cruelty, though she'd been violated with impunity, she walked steady, unshaken, like a woman who knew exactly who she was. Like every step crushed the flames of hatred they tried to light under her. But Riker didn't know. He had no idea. He was too arrogant, too blind to recognize that the black woman he had just humiliated in that cold room wasn't just any citizen. She was the one about to sit behind the judge's bench, the one who would calmly preside over the trial where his system, the very one he thought he ruled, was on full display. And more than that, he had laid hands, his entitled, hateful hands, on the wrong woman. The wrong melanated queen who didn't need anyone to declare her worth. The wrong symbol, one our people will never let stand alone. That morning in mid-October, Courtroom 3 was strung tight like a violin about to snap. Autumn wind whispered through the tall glass panes, slipping in like a warning. The ceiling fans turned slowly, deliberately, as if trying to stretch time before something shattered. The gallery was packed. Curious faces filled the wooden benches, whispering like a hive of stirred-up bees, phones in hand, necks craned, eyes wide with confusion, anticipation, and disbelief. The rumor had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. A black woman, head shaved clean, humiliated in the security screening room, dragged in like a suspect, and now she had just entered the building again. But when the heavy mahogany doors swung open, every whisper died, every phone dropped to a still hand, every breath caught. The sound of Celeste's heels echoed across the floor, each step like a funeral drum. Mourning, not her dignity, but the death of justice itself. She walked with her quiet defiance, not rage, not vengeance, but presence, so commanding it silenced the room. Her bare head caught the light, a thin red mark visible at the nape of her neck, and her eyes, those deep, steady, searing eyes, looked straight ahead. She didn't need to speak, didn't need to explain. Her existence in that courtroom, after what they'd tried to erase, was the indictment. At the side door stood Deputy Hank Riker, the man who had held the clippers just an hour earlier. He was frozen. His hand gripped the edge of his duty belt, his knuckles white, a faint tremble in his wrist, and when Celeste's gaze brushed across him, not lingering, not dramatic, just enough, his breath hitched, because for the first time the shadow of power he had once used to intimidate others was now looming over him. Moments later, the courtroom door creaked open quietly. Alicia, the court clerk, walked in with gentle but purposeful steps and placed the black judge's robe carefully over the arm of the chair. Celeste didn't wait for anyone's help. She reached for it herself. Her movements were deliberate, sacred, like a warrior dressing in the armor of her ancestors, layered with the flesh and scars of black sisters who had come before her. As the robe settled over her shoulders, draping over the raw red marks, she sat, back straight, eyes forward, no trembling, no retreat, solid, like the last pillar still standing in the wreckage of what's right.
This court is now in session.
Her voice rang out, slow and sharp, not loud, but piercing, like a scalpel slicing through the cancerous tissue of a system that had rotted too long. Today's hearing was a civil case, a lawsuit against 7 police officers accused of using excessive force during a peaceful protest last May. Among the victims, a 17-year-old black boy pinned to the ground with a knee to his neck, his windpipe crushed, barely alive. Celeste had been assigned this case well before this morning's incident. But today, she was more than a judge. She was evidence, a living witness, a voice for the thousands of melanated souls who had stepped into courtrooms like this and been treated like garbage. The plaintiff's attorney, Mr. Davis, stood up. He read the opening statement, clear, brief, blistering. Then he called the first witness, Howard Briggs, age 46, warehouse worker, father of the injured boy. He moved toward the stand slowly, shoulders sagging, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. His large, work-worn hands clenched tightly. When he spoke, his voice caught in his chest. But the words still came out, each one like a needle piercing through the silence.
They said he was faking.
He stared at some invisible point in the distance.
He couldn't breathe. I knelt down. I begged them. Please, he's just 17. But they said, he'll be fine. Get out of here, old man.
He inhaled sharply, his voice dropping low.
No one called for help. No one looked at him like he was a child. They looked at him like he was a problem that needed to be erased.
No one spoke. There were only sharp breaths, a few teary eyes, and Celeste, still seated, unblinking, her fingers tapping lightly on the bench. Each tap like a heartbeat, like the pulse of every soul in that courtroom bearing silent witness. When Mr. Briggs stepped down, the next witness was called. Denise Talley, 52 years old, former head of records for this very courthouse. She had served 8 years behind the walls of silence, short, silver hair, thick glasses, crisp white button-down, tucked in with precision. She walked to the stand with a steadiness that felt like someone finally stepping out of a long shadow.
Miss Talley, did you ever receive complaints about Officer Hank Riker?
She took a deep breath, nodded.
Yes, more than I could count. 12 formal reports, but I remember at least 20 others. Informal. From interns, from local citizens, from victims of illegal searches.
And what did you do with those complaints?
I filed them, followed the chain of command, like we were told to.
And then?
Silence stretched across the room like a held breath.
No investigations. Some reports were marked resolved. Others just disappeared from the system.
Disappeared?
Denise nodded slowly, then looked over, straight at Celeste.
On verbal instruction, from one man, his name, Judge Terence Mahoney.
Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Whispers swelled like a tide. Someone dropped a pen. Mahoney, a towering figure in Charleston's judicial system, a man long considered the keeper of the law, and once, years ago, Celeste's mentor, the one who'd opened doors when she was just a first-year clerk. Celeste didn't flinch, but her fingers clenched the edge of the bench. Her lips tightened, not in shock, but in a bitter ache of someone who had known the truth for years, yet had never been able to prove it until now. Denise lifted her head, voice rising with fire.
They told me to stay quiet, said if I kept pushing it would damage the court's image. But I ask you, what image are we protecting? When inside these very walls, people laughed while shaving the head of an innocent black woman like she was nothing.
Her words hung in the air, not just a testimony, but a second trial unfolding inside the first, a reckoning. Celeste tapped her gavel, called for a recess. She rose from her seat and stepped down from the bench. No one said a word, but many rose quietly to their feet, and they watched her walk, not with fear, but with reverence. In their eyes, for the first time, there was no doubt. No second guessing, no polite distance. There was sorrow, there was guilt, there was gratitude. But most of all, there was the look of people finally waking up, realizing that justice does not always descend from on high. Sometimes justice begins the moment one person dares to look it in the eye and speak the truth. What was unfolding now was no longer a routine court proceeding. This was an excavation of truth. The first strike of a shovel tearing into the rotted foundation, a foundation long buried beneath layers of order and reputation that had silenced justice for decades. Celeste returned to the bench after recess. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She quietly opened the folder in front of her, flipping through the pages with the grace of habit. But her eyes never left the people seated below, the ones who had once patted Riker on the back, the ones who had shaken Mahoney's hand, the ones who had chuckled when someone was denied their right to speak at a public hearing. And then the last door creaked open. A man stepped in, middle-aged, a slight limp in his stride. In his hand, a thick folder. On his chest, a U.S. Marshal badge, federal issue. His name, Andrew Taylor, former federal security officer, assigned to this very courthouse, 8 years of service before he was transferred out. Celeste knew his name, and he knew hers.
Your Honor.
Taylor began after taking the oath. His voice was rough, weathered by cigarettes and time, but steady, clear.
I worked here from 2004 to 2012. I used to patrol these very hallways. I stood watch outside that courtroom, and I saw things I should never have stayed quiet about.
The room held its breath.
I saw Riker. At first, it was small insults, then rough searches, then holding people without paperwork. The longer it went on, the more out of control he became. And me, I did nothing.
His voice cracked, but he kept going.
Because I was afraid. I was a black man in a system where, even in uniform, I was still looked at with suspicion. I was afraid I'd get transferred. Afraid I'd be labeled a troublemaker like every other melanated officer who ever dared to speak up.
Celeste remained still, but her heart thundered like war drums, not in anger at Taylor, but because she knew that feeling intimately, that deep ache of knowing the truth, but knowing truth doesn't stand a chance when it walks alone. Taylor placed the thick folder onto the table.
These are copies, records of the 12 formal complaints I personally saw. I made secret photocopies, just in case someday someone would be brave enough to do what's right.
He paused, then looked directly at Celeste.
Today is that day, and you are that someone.
A wave of breath swept through the room. Some people exhaled, others closed their eyes. One bit their lip, and then, as if carried by an unspoken current, 5 others stood up. An elderly woman in a purple blouse, silver curls framing her weathered face, held up a faded letter.
I filed a complaint in 2010. They searched me illegally. No one ever called me back.
A young man with scarred cheeks stood next. A single mother, a college student, a disabled veteran. One by one they rose from the shadows, bringing with them memories, evidence, and truths that had been buried under shame and silence. The courtroom fell still, not out of shock anymore, but reverence, recognition, until Celeste rose. She didn't deliver a speech. She didn't lecture. She simply opened her mouth, and in a voice clear and razor-sharp, she declared,
Let the record show, this court is no longer a chamber of silence. We are not just putting one man on trial today. We are putting an entire system on trial, a system that protected him, From the silent clerks, to the record keepers forced to erase complaints, to the judges who quietly pushed files aside just to protect the court's image.
Her eyes swept across the rows of faces before her, some ashamed, some awakened, some finally seeing.
I used to believe I could change the system from the inside, with calm, with credentials, with the law. But today I understand something deeper. When you are a Black woman in America, they will never give you justice. You have to take it.
From the far end of the courtroom, a soft clap broke the silence. Just one, then another, then another. A slow wave of hands meeting hands, like dry timber finally catching fire after years of drought. Celeste lifted the gavel, struck once.
This court will proceed. But let the record show, this courtroom does not operate the way it used to.
Within just a few hours, Courtroom 3 was no longer just a place to read indictments. It had become a mirror, a raw, unflinching reflection of the system itself. Who gets believed? Who gets silenced? Who wears the robe? And who gets stripped to the bone? Outside, the press had arrived. News vans lined the sidewalks of Charleston. Satellite dishes spinning like metal flowers blooming under pressure. Crowds gathered along the courthouse steps. A group of Black mothers stood arm in arm, holding signs that read, "Protect Black Women." Beside them, young people live streamed from their phones, hashtags glowing on screens. #Justice with Celeste. The image of Celeste Monroe, head bare, eyes unblinking, began appearing in headlines, on banners, in every corner of the internet, like a flame catching wind. And in the midst of this swelling unrest, just as the afternoon session began, a quiet counterstrike unfolded. From the defense table, Attorney Gregory Alton rose. White, mid-50s, gray pinstripe suit, deep plum tie. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was calm, measured, and razor-sharp in its intent.
Your Honor.
Alton began, turning toward Celeste with a polished gaze, polite on the surface, but carrying the faintest shadow of contempt finely disguised.
Given the personal events of this morning, namely the situation involving Judge Monroe and the defendant, we respectfully request that she recuse herself from presiding over this trial on grounds of severe lack of objectivity.
A hush fell over the room. It was a familiar move, a tactic the system had perfected. When you can't deny the wrongdoing, you discredit the one who exposed it. Celeste raised her head, her eyes locked onto his. She didn't speak immediately. 3 breaths passed. Then she stood. The golden light of late afternoon poured through the frosted window behind her, casting her silhouette long across the courtroom floor. A dark pillar, standing firm in a space thick with doubt.
You're saying that because I was assaulted this morning, I'm no longer capable of being objective?
Yes, Your Honor, Alton replied carefully. It could compromise the fairness of the proceedings.
Celeste stepped down from the bench. Every step she took held the entire room still. No judge had ever descended from the bench and still carried this much control.
Mr. Alton,
She said, her voice low and steady.
let me tell you what objectivity means. Objectivity doesn't mean silence. It doesn't mean turning away when a woman is dragged into a back room and has her head shaved in broad daylight. Objectivity doesn't mean pretending that being humiliated for being a Black woman has no impact on my ability to understand the law. On the contrary, it's precisely because I've lived it that I understand the fear of the witness, the doubt of the plaintiff, and the silence of those whose voices have been stomped out.
A quiet rumble moved through the courtroom. Not noise, but energy. Alton didn't speak again.
I will not recuse myself. And if you'd like to file a motion for appeal, I suggest you get it started. But let me say this clearly. If you think I am the problem, then you've never cared about the truth in the first place.
She turned then toward the 3 officers stationed quietly in the corner of the room. With a subtle nod, she gave the order.
Arrest Deputy Hank Riker officially on charges of abuse of authority, assaulting a federal official, and violation of civil rights.
Riker, who had sat like a shadow in the doorway, now turned pale. He staggered half a step back, eyes wide with the terror of a man watching his own power collapse around him. No one stepped in to save him. Two officers approached. One cuffed his wrists. The other stripped the badge from his chest like peeling away skin.
No, you can't do this. I was following protocol. I have rights.
His voice cracked into panic, like someone tumbling into the very pit he'd spent years digging for others. Celeste cut through his protest, her voice a blade.
You had rights when the system stayed silent. Today, we are silent no more.
As Riker was led out, no one applauded, no one cheered. They watched, because this was not the end. This was only the beginning. That night, a soft rain fell over Charleston. A steady winter drizzle soaked into the old brickwork of the courthouse, washing away the dust of time, or at least some of the silent stains it had carried for decades. Inside, Celeste sat alone in her judge's chambers. A dim amber glow from the desk lamp spilled across piles of legal documents. But she wasn't reading. She wasn't writing. She simply stared at the mirror on the opposite wall. Reflected back was a woman, bald, wearing the black robe of the court, eyes rimmed red but dry as bone. Her hair, once a quiet crown of silver, a symbol of age, of calm authority, had been stripped away like it was part of some cruel joke. But what remained could not be shaved off. Her will, her memory, her history, woven into every melanated cell of her skin. A gentle knock on the door. Nan entered, Celeste's younger sister, wearing a soft gray sweater, carrying a small bag in her hand.
Are you ready?
Nan asked, offering a quiet smile. Celeste nodded, slowly, without a word. Nan pulled a chair behind her sister, opened the small bag, and took out a set of clippers. She plugged them in. The soft buzz echoed through the room, but this time it didn't carry the violence of the morning. It sounded like wind through a field after the rain. This wasn't forced, wasn't shame. This time, it was choice, it was control, it was cleansing. Nan gently shaved away the last remaining strands, each pass of the clippers steady, careful, like tending to a wound, not hiding it. When she finished, Celeste picked up the mirror. No makeup, no mask, no lowered gaze.
You could walk into that courtroom like this and still make the whole room rise to its feet.
Celeste smiled for the first time that day. Not because of the bald head, she said softly, but because they're finally seeing the real me. The next morning, the headlines erupted. Images of Celeste Monroe, bald, robed, unflinching, standing at the bench flooded national television. But the image wasn't what mattered most. It was the truth behind it. And for the first time in a long time, black communities across the country could point at the screen and say, "That one, she's ours." Below a Washington Post article, a pinned comment read, "She's not just a judge. She's the one who made the system look at itself in the mirror." 1 week later, Celeste officially announced a sweeping reform package known as the Monroe Mandate. At a press conference attended by hundreds of journalists and legal representatives, she stood at the podium, bald under a flurry of camera flashes, and declared,
Starting today, all federal courthouse security and judicial personnel in this region will undergo mandatory training in racial bias, behavioral psychology, and public ethics. At the same time, we are establishing an independent Justice Oversight Commission made up of citizens, attorneys, and community leaders, not to police the judges, but to ensure the people are no longer policed by fear.
The applause thundered. Not the polite kind, not politics. This was release. This was unity. This was rebirth. 2 months later, Celeste was invited to speak at a historically black high school in Georgia. A 9th grade girl who had spent the year wearing hoodies to school hiding her short hair from bullies, walked onto the stage and handed Celeste a drawing. It showed a bald black woman standing tall, holding the Constitution high above her head, surrounded by a sea of silent onlookers. Beneath the image were the words, "It's not the hair, it's the head held high." Celeste pulled the girl into a hug. She didn't need to say anything. 1 year later, the Monroe Mandate reached the floor of the U.S. Senate. It wasn't passed in full, but it broke the ground. And by then, 4 other states had already adopted similar reforms. The ripple had begun. In Charleston, every courtroom hearing now includes community oversight. The same citizens who once feared walking through the courthouse doors now step in with confidence, carrying complaints, their voices, and their dignity. Celeste Monroe still shows up every day. She presides. She wields the gavel. She reads the law. She listens. But one thing has changed. She no longer walks into that courtroom with the need to prove she belongs there, because now she is a symbol, and no one can take that away. And every time she walks down the courthouse hallway, a young black security officer, hair trimmed tight, eyes steady, places his hand over his chest and nods with quiet reverence. "Respect, Judge Monroe." She simply nods back, smiles, because she knows this is the legacy. Not medals, not titles, but the shift in the hearts of those who once believed they had no power at all. On a Friday evening, nearly 1 year after the trial that changed everything, Celeste Monroe stood before hundreds of people at the National Justice Medal ceremony in Washington, D.C. There was no red carpet, no dazzling lights, just a plain wooden podium, a brass microphone, and a sea of faces, lawyers, citizens, students, and black mothers who had once been forgotten. Celeste stepped forward, her head still bald, her robe still black, her eyes still steady, no introduction needed. Everyone in the room knew who she was. Her voice rose, soft but sharp as a vow carved in stone.
I am not standing here because I'm stronger than anyone else. I'm standing here because I survived. I survived a security screening with no justification. I survived the silence of the system. I survived the laughter of those who believed a black woman had no right to sit on a judge's bench.
The auditorium fell silent.
But I'm also standing here for another reason, because I refuse to stand still while people like me are still being dragged down, still being doubted, still being stripped of their dignity simply because of their skin, their gender, because they don't carry the kind of credibility someone else decided was valid. We don't need justice just in writing. We need justice that has a presence, eyes, ears, a heart. Justice that hears trembling voices, not just powerful testimony.
She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. In the front row, an elderly black woman in a lavender knit headscarf sat with tears in her eyes, nodding gently. Celeste recognized her, one of the first women ever searched by Riker, humiliated for carrying her heart medication in her purse.
To everyone listening in this room, at home, or in some quiet corner of the world, if you've ever been humiliated, if you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever been called something that wasn't your name, you are not crazy. You are not mistaken. You are not alone. You've been seen, and now you've been heard. I don't tell this story to be pitied. I tell it so that someone somewhere won't have to tell the same one 20 years from now.
After the ceremony, Celeste didn't leave in an escort car or black SUV. She quietly walked to her old silver Buick, just like every other day. But before she could pull out of the lot, a young girl, maybe 17, her head clean-shaven, ran up to the window and tapped.
"Judge Monroe?"
The girl's voice trembled.
"You don't remember me, but I saw you in that live stream. And ever since that day, I stopped wearing hats to hide my head."
Celeste looked at her. No rush, no surprise, just a soft smile.
You don't need to cover anything.
She said, gently placing a hand on the girl's shoulder.
Because you are what justice looks like when it changes shape.
The girl burst into tears. Celeste pulled her into an embrace, not just a hug of comfort, but a passing of the torch. And now it's your turn. If you saw yourself in this story, if something in your chest clenched, if you felt anger, pain, or a deep, quiet stillness, don't carry it alone. Don't leave it unspoken. Share this story. Speak your own. And remind someone today, we are still here. We are still rising. And we are no longer silent. Share this story. Send it to someone you know who needs to hear this. And if you believe justice isn't just what's written on paper, keep standing. We can't fix the entire system alone, but we can create the bending points in history, one story, one action, one voice at a time. Because as Celeste once said, justice doesn't come from power. It comes from presence. And today, with every share, every voice, every time you dare to speak the truth you once kept hidden, you are present. You are rewriting the rules. You are making justice breathe. Thank you for following the story of Judge Celeste Monroe. If you want to walk this journey with us, hit subscribe, share this video, raise your voice, because justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins right here with us, together, right now,